Hi there, I'm Kathleen Jasper, and today we're going over the SSA 6991. That's the School Superintendent Assessment, and this is part one of our mini-series for this exam. And we're going to be going through the structure of the exam, how you score your exam, and the good words you should be on the lookout for when you are working through this exam. Let's get started. Okay, so if you're trying to become a superintendent at the district level, so this is district level leadership, you will probably have to take some sort of an exam, and most people around the country will take the SLLA 6991. Now, we have a ton of resources for the SLLA 6990, which is the test you take to become an assistant principal to finish your leadership certification. But the school superintendent assessment is a little bit different, but it has a lot of the same themes. So if you're thinking about tackling this particular exam, you should go for it because it's not as difficult as it seems. Some of the same themes and patterns that I talk about in the SLLA 6990 show up here on the 6991, all right? Now, we know always, whenever you see one of my videos, I'm always gonna take you to the blueprint and the specification because it is the most important document you will ever study when it comes to any of these exams. So you always wanna pull the blueprint and the document, and I will link it up in the description below so you don't have to go hunting for it. All right, let's hop over to my computer so I can show you a few things. First of all, again, this is the school superintendent assessment. And of course, this is the blueprint for the exam. When we go down into here, and I'm going to go through this a little bit more in depth in a second on my presentation, but you'll see that this is the layout of the exam. There are 7 main content categories, and here are all the percentages at which you will see those content categories on the exam. Now, I will talk about that more in depth in a second. You have 3 hours for this exam, and there are 120 selected response questions, and then you have 3 constructed response questions. This particular video, we're just going to focus on the multiple choice. In a subsequent video, I will walk you through the constructed response so you have some support in that area. Now remember, when we talk about the blueprint, we really want to focus in on these test specifications. The test specs, like I like to call them and other people like to call them, have the specific language and the specific things that you are going to be assessed on this exam. So you can see here we have strategic leadership, which is content category 1, and all of the things under strategic leadership that you need to know, and it goes all the way down here to number 8. Now, a couple of things about this. All of the language used in this test specification, all of this stuff here, there's language and words and things like that. It's really important information. You want to grab that as part of your good word strategies. We're going to talk more about the good word strategies in a second, but all of the information under the specs is really important. Like, take a look here. This word advocates for a culture of equity and inclusiveness, caring and trust. Those are good words when we're talking about strategic leadership. You're going to be the superintendent of an entire school district. You have an entire community you are leading here. So we have to really focus in on that advocating for people in your community, all people in your community. That'll become a little more clear when we get into the questions, but just know, like communication is a big one. How many of you are frustrated because your district doesn't communicate with you properly, right? It's like the biggest complaint of every teacher, every administrator, anybody that is working closely with districts. So that's part of your job. And on it goes down. We have here, promotes a shared commitment, right? You got to bring all the people in and have them get on the bus. And you're driving the bus, so to speak. And so you really want to hone in on those words. So be sure you read through all of this. I'm not going to read it to you. Obviously, you can do that yourself. But what is in the specifications is so important because anything in the specs is fair game for the exam. And you will find the language in the test specifications is in the correct answer choices on the exam. Let me say that again. The language you see here on the specs in this, breakdown of the exam is in the correct answer choices on the test. You will find this language in the right answers, okay? So then we go here, we have instructional leadership, and again, we have curriculum and instruction, and all of that goes down. Assessment, of course, data-driven decision-making is gonna be big for this. You're using district-wide data, not just school data. You're using, district and state data to drive your instructions. Of course, we have climate and cultural leadership. Big job for the superintendent, making sure that we are promoting a culture of equity and cultural responsiveness. Much easier said than done. Lots of people need training on this. This is one of the most challenging pieces, I think, of this because this is very vague. Like it says, oh, promotes an inclusive culture. And it's like, okay, what does that mean? So really dig in here and try to understand, what all those specifics are. We have climate and culture for staff. Of course, we want to promote that. Then we get into content category number 4, ethical and policy leadership. As a superintendent, policy, state law, things like that, federal law are going to guide your decisions and, what you're allowed to do. You're going to be working a lot with school boards and things like that. And so there's going to be some specific rules that you're going to need to abide by for that. So that's really, really important. Of course, then we have organizational leadership when we talk about professional capacity. So getting the most out of your staff, from the custodians and the people who are staff in the office, to the teachers, to the administrators, to the coaches. I mean, you are in charge of everybody, okay? So professional capacity is really, really important there, and how to motivate your personnel. Operations management, oh my gosh, as a superintendent, I mean, you've got baseball fields all over the place, football fields, soccer fields, theaters. You have all kinds of public spaces that you're overseeing. So this is a big one here. Really important. It's a huge job. And then of course we have community leadership, which is what you're going to see embedded on many of the questions on this exam. All of the practice tests I've seen have this underlying community awareness that the superintendent needs to have, because you're not just in charge of the school now. You're not just in charge of the teachers. And I say in charge, you're not really in charge. You're more like leading, inspiring. But you are, leading an entire organization, and then several of those organizations. So you're leading principals from the high schools in your area, the elementary schools, the middle schools, the coaches, the custodians, the bus drivers, the district personnel. There are so many things going on for this particular job. So community is not just about those who are outside of the school, but it's also the school community, your administrative community, your school board community, and then of course the wider community, the people who live in the area and who go to the schools that you are leading. So really, really important there. And then we have the 7th content category, which is integrated knowledge and understanding of the case study. Now, we're going to talk about that in a different video. It looks a lot more difficult than it is. One thing I love about the Praxis constructed responses and the ETS constructed responses, that's who makes this exam, by the way, ETS. They're very to the point with their constructed responses. They give you a task, they want you to do the task, and that's all you have to do. No more, no less. So we will talk about that in another video, but just know that don't be too afraid of the writing. It's not that difficult. Now, the last thing I'm going to talk about in terms of the test specifications is down here. You're going to want to look over these practice test questions, and we're going to go through a few of them today, all right? But one of the things that I think is even better than the practice test questions is this right here. The study topics at the end. I'm telling you, most people don't even look at this. I love this part of the spec because they have it broken up by content category and by sub-content category. So you've got strategic leadership, and then you have the subsections: mission, vision, core values, district, school improvement, and on down. You can see that. But then over here on the right-hand side, you have all these discussion areas. If you can answer these questions in depth and kind of think about them and talk about them and understand them, you're ready to take this exam. Now, of course, they don't have the ABC attached or ABCD attached to it, and they're not like exact questions you're going to see on the exam. But I don't know what questions you're going to get on the exam. Neither do you. You shouldn't know. It's a big standardized test. There are item banks with lots and lots of questions in them, and you're going to get a few here and a few there. But if you can, talk about these discussion topics, and you can really dig in and kind of, write a short answer for each one, or maybe even just talk about it. Sometimes I like to print these out and just talk about it, put it here and say, what would I say about that if I was trying to explain that to somebody, or if I were talking to my colleague about this? And if you can do that, you're ready for this exam. And notice it goes on and on. We've got climate and cultural leadership, and then we have the study topics here. Here it is. How can a district foster an environment that supports a rigorous curriculum and high student expectations? All good words, rigor. and high expectations. Of course, those are all good words, but understanding how would I do that? It goes beyond just hiring the right people, right? We're going to use data to drive our instructional decisions. We're going to progress monitor constantly. We're going to train our teachers in how to implement rigorous curriculum, and we're going to make sure that we're constantly looking over the data and implementing, new practices when we need to, and cultivating the practices that are working, doing more of those so that we keep that trajectory going up, 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 up. So students are achieving, achieving, achieving. So make sure you look over pages 49 to 54 in this study companion. So that's the SSA, School Superintendent Assessment 6991. All right, so now we're going to go over the second part of the video, and we're going to take a look at the blueprint and the percentages at which you're going to see the questions. We're going to go over good words to look for in the answer choices, and then we're going to work through some particular questions that you might see on the exam. Okay, so let's take a look at the blueprint. This is going to break down the types of questions you're going to see and at what percentage. So you can see here, strategic leadership is 16%, instructional leadership is 12%, climate and culture 14%, ethical and policy 10%, organizational 15%, community leadership is 8%, and then we have the constructed response. Now, notice that the constructed response is worth 25. That means that the multiple choice is worth 75. They call it selected response. Selected response, multiple choice, same thing, okay? Now, when you are trying to figure out your score on this particular exam, you're going to want to do a couple things. First, you're going to take your main raw score of the multiple choice. So let's say you're doing a practice test and you get 80 out of 120 correct. All right, so you bought the practice test on the website, you do it, or you study a little bit, you get a test prep book, and you get 80 out of 120 on the practice test, and you're trying to predict how you're going to do on test day. So what I do there is I take 80 and divide it by 120, and I get a percentage. 80 divided by 120, and I get 0.6, we're going to round up, 7. All right, 0.67. What I'm going to do is drop that decimal point. All right, and I'm going to multiply this by 0.75 because this is 75% of the test. The selected response is 75% of the test. So when I take 7 and multiply that by 0.75, I get 50.25. So I'm just gonna make that 50. Okay, I'm not going to deal a lot with decimals and everything here because we're just estimating what our score would be. Obviously, when they're scoring it, they are most likely putting it into a machine and it's spitting out a score. But I'm going to show you roughly how this is done. Now, this isn't exact because some questions are worth more. I'll talk about that in a second. But this is how you would score it. So if I got 80 out of 20, I'm looking at a 50 right now for the multiple choice. Now, that's not a 50%. This is a score. This is a scale score that we're doing here. There's a lot of weird things that happen. So 80 divided by 20 is 0.67. Drop the decimal, multiply it by 0.75 because the multiple choice is only 75%. It's not 100% of the test. Now let's talk about the constructed response. The case study, or the writing portion of the exam, there are 3 questions and you can get up to 3 points. There's a total of 3 points for each question. So you have 3 times 3, which is 9. Okay? So 9 possible points on the writing. Now that's 25% of your grade. So let's just say you got a 7 out of 9 on the writing. Okay? When we divide 7 divided by 9, we get 0.77777 on out. So let's just do 0.78. So I have 7 over 9, and that equals 0.78. Now I'm going to multiply that by 0.25 because it's 25% of the exam. All right. So if I take 78 times 0.25, I get 19.5. We can round up to 20 if you want, just to make it easy. So 0.78 times 0.25, and I get 19.5. We're going to just round to 20. Now what I do is I add the 50 plus the 20. I get 70. And then for this test, for praxis, they add a 1. So this would be a 170, probably passing depending on your depending on your district. But that's a pretty good score. 170 is a pretty good score on this exam. So that's how you would calculate your score for this test. So really quickly to recap, the multiple choice is 75%. So take your raw score, which is, in this case, it's 80. You take 80 and divide it by the total, 120, we get a percentage, 0.67, or a decimal, but it's a percentage, 0.67. Drop the decimal, multiply it by 0.75 or 75% because the multiple choice is only 75% of your grade. So you get a 50, roughly. Then you take the writing and you have a possible of 9 points out of the writing because there are 3 questions and you can get possible points of 3. So you're going to do, let's just say 7 out of 9, you get a 6 out of 9, whatever. You take that, take 7 divided by 9, whatever your score was on there, 7 divided by 9. You get a percentage or a decimal, drop the decimal, multiply that by 0.25, and you get, in this case, 20, because we rounded up, it was 19.5. Add the multiple choice score to the writing score, so 50 plus 20 gives you 70, and then add a 1, and that's how they do it. Now remember, very quickly, these questions are not all just worth 1 point on the multiple choice. You will have some sections where they ask you to choose all that apply or choose 3 or choose 2. In that case, those questions are worth more. So this is not an exact calculation. This can change depending on what types of questions you have, all right? So be sure you understand that there is a little wiggle room there, plus or minus a couple of points, but that's how you calculate your score. All right, so now let's go over my favorite thing to do, which is look for good words in the answer choices on the exam. So I want you to be on the lookout for these good words because when you see these words in the answer choices, you want to slow down and take a look and make sure that you pay attention to those answer choices because it might be the right answer on the test. Now, it doesn't mean that every time you see the word community, it's going to be the correct answer on the exam. It will be a lot of times, but you have to read the question as well. But what I recommend is working backwards on this exam, going to the answer choices first, eliminating any kind of bad answer choices, zeroing in on the answer choices with good words, then read the question, and you will have a better chance of answering these correctly. Now, this is a very high level test. And so one of the things about this exam is in the answer choices, they all look really good. They all have good words in them. So we're going to have to work extra hard to kind of dissect them and show you some patterns that you need to be on the lookout for. But I definitely want you to keep these things in mind when looking for correct answer choices on the exam. All right. The good word strategy has worked wonders for so many teachers and administrators, and I know it will help you on this exam. All right. So let's take a look. My first good word is community. The reason why it's at the top of my list is because you are no longer an assistant principal or a principal. You're not at the building level anymore. You're at the district level. So you are, leading everybody. This job is a big job. I wouldn't want this job. This is a lot of people. This is bus drivers. This is staff. This is custodians. This is parents. This is the school board. This is district personnel, teachers, administrators, principals, everybody. And you're working with all of those people, all of those personalities, all of those needs, all of those wants, all of those desires. And it's your job to inspire all of them. And it's a big deal. So community is at the top. Now that might be that you are, going to community events, getting into the community and asking the community questions. It could be a smaller community where you're working with teachers, but the word community is everywhere on this exam, and it's embedded in a lot of questions that are not just for the community content category. It's actually interwoven throughout the entire assessment. So be on the lookout for that. Of course, 100%. You are going to be data driven. First thing you're going to do as a superintendent before you make any decisions, and this goes for being a principal, assistant principal, teacher, anybody, data driven decision making. You want to be looking at that achievement data. You want to be looking at survey data. It comes in all forms: quantitative, qualitative, observation, state data, national data. All of that is going to help you make good decisions and for you to continuously improve and monitor the decisions you make. You make one decision one day, you got to keep looking at the data to see if you need to modify that decision on down the line, which you probably will because things change, right? Of course, procedures, just like they're important in the classroom, just like they're important at the school level, they're important at the district level, and they need to be communicated properly, and people need to be trained properly. So procedures are always going to be on the good side of the answer choices. Being proactive. Now, we all know as administrators, and I know this because I was an administrator, that most of your day is reacting, right? Putting out fires. And the same thing will happen to you as a superintendent for sure. There's always something going on. The news is at your door because somebody did something. There could be a fire in the school. There's a bomb threat, all of these things that are going to play into your day. But you want to make sure that you are as proactive as possible when, kind of planning what's going on. So that means public relations campaigns, communication campaigns, any kind of professional development. You want to anticipate any kind of problems you're going to have. I used to work for a principal who was really good at anticipating problems. I was always like, okay, let's do this. It's going to be so great. I'm like, let's do a big event. And I had all these pie in the sky ideas. And he would say to me, have you thought about this? Have you thought about this? And I always thought he was such a Debbie Downer. I used to call him the no monster, because he would just say no all the time. But he really taught me how to, anticipate issues. As a superintendent, you're going to have to be doing that a lot for this exam. Vertical and horizontal alignment are a big deal when you're talking about district leadership, because you want everything to be vertically aligned, meaning first grade builds to second grade, builds to third grade, builds to fourth grade, which seems kind of like a no-brainer, of course. But when you're talking about several schools, several elementary schools, several middle schools, several high schools, it's hard to get everybody on the same page so that they are vertically aligned together, so that they're feeding, the feeder schools with students who are prepared for the next level. So that's a big deal. Then we have horizontal alignment, which is within grade levels. So your social studies teachers planning with your English teachers and your elementary teams, working on things. So that horizontal alignment too. Middle schools working with middle schools. Now we're coming out to the district lens, right? High schools commingling with other high schools and working with them to make sure initiatives get done, stuff like that. So be sure that you understand that, okay? Of course, optimizing capacity, making sure you're putting the right people in the right positions. This is really hard. Putting the right people in the right positions is really, really, really tough. If you are good at that, you have a skill that will take you far in business, leadership, all of it, because that is hard. But figuring out not just optimizing, good people, putting them where, but you got a budget to deal with too. You might want to hire this person, but it might be too expensive. So getting the most out of your budget and optimizing personnel and making sure that you get the most out of everybody that works for you. Crisis management, it's going to be on the daily. Being a superintendent, you are so exposed to crises, your own crisis. Every time I see a leader on TV, whether I agree with that leader or not, because I've been in leadership before, I know that it's tough, because any little thing you do is going to be on the news. Anything you say could be on the news. You're going to have angry parents. This is a job not for the faint of heart. So crisis management, and it could be anything from death to accidents to fires, bomb threats, active shooters. The list goes on and on and on. So it takes really good people to get that. And you're going to need good people around you too. And that's optimizing capacity, making sure you are surrounded by the best people as the leader, people who are going to protect you and people who are going to tell you when, you need to not do something or to do something. You need to be open to people telling you, hey, that's not a great idea. I would do something differently. And then the 3 C's, what I like to call the 3 C's, communication, collaboration, and community. Now, I know I talked about community here, but I want to talk about it in context here. First of all, communication, we want to be sure that we are communicating effectively with the entire district. Now, this is way easier said than done. An email goes out, who's reading their emails? Teachers are like, I don't have time to read email. They don't have time to read email in the morning. They don't have time to read email in the afternoon. Then it gets buried to the bottom. If you send them an email in the afternoon, they're fried, burnt out. If it's a long email with a lot of information in it, I mean, it's just really hard. Communication is tough. Of course, most districts are on social media utilizing, that short communication. Short communication is good because people do not want a 5-page email. But figuring out ways to communicate not just with the teachers and the staff and your administrators, but also parents, community members, business owners, all of that. So that's really important. Collaboration. Again, you're going to be collaborating with your team, but you're also going to be collaborating with principals because they're on boots on the ground. They're in the schools. They know what's up. You are outside the schools at the district office usually. While you might go in and visit and you might understand what's going on, you're not there every day. You got other stuff going on. So you really want to collaborate with those principals to get an understanding of what's going on in the school. And teachers, remember, they're in the classroom every day doing the job. So make sure that you're understanding what they're going through. That's one of the biggest things. Teachers are like, my administrators and my superintendent has no idea what I do every day. The legislators who make the rules, they have no idea what we're doing every day. So try to be one of those superintendents who is in the schools and really kind of, taking the pulse, figuring out what's going on in the schools. And then, of course, community. And I said it before, remember, the community is not just the people who live in the community, but it's business owners, it's large corporations, like Target and Walmart and organizations like that you can partner with. It's also your parents. Everyone from the parents who are super involved and who have all the resources in the world to help the school, and also the parents and the community who can't be as involved because they're working 2 or 3 jobs and they are, in the low socioeconomic area, or, all kinds of diverse populations, whether it's socioeconomic, race, religious, all of that. You want to make sure you're bringing all those people in to help you understand your community. You want to get out there. As a superintendent, your job is constant. You're going to community stuff. You're out in the community all the time. My husband would be the best at this job because he loves to go to all kinds of community events. He loves it. So this is really important. If you don't like going to community events, if you don't like shaking hands and you don't like people, this is definitely not the job for you. And then, of course, cultural responsiveness. Leaders, right now more than ever, but always, have a responsibility to promote cultural responsiveness with themselves. And, I'm still learning every day, even with the communication I do online, but with themselves, with their teams, with their principals. This has got to be on the forefront of what we do every day. Teachers, making sure people are trained and understand, and not just told you need to be more inclusive, provide people with the proper training and the good information and interesting and engaging ways to do this kind of work. Because if you just send an email about cultural responsiveness, nobody's reading that, right? Or if you just say, do this training, this 300-hour ESOL training, that's not being culturally responsive. It's getting in there, getting engaged, and helping people understand this aspect of leadership. So that's it for part 1 of our SSA 6991. And if you like this particular video, please consider subscribing and hitting the notifications button so you're notified when we upload new content. Tell your fellow colleagues that we're here doing videos for this particular assessment. If you'd like us to film something else, throw it in the comments below and let us know how you're doing. Thank you so much and have an awesome day.